after e4, e5, f4 and d5, in this video we're going to go through the main move, obviously of taking the pawn in d5 and then we take in f4. The main move now is knight f3, and this is how we're going to be closing the chapter of this is going to be the last chapter of the Beat the King's Gambit saga. Before we do that, let's look at this move which we haven't seen. So in the previous video, if you remember, we went through knight c3 or bishop b5. Both of these moves get punished immediately by queen to h4 check. Let's look at this idea though, bishop e2, the idea of playing king to f1 and going through something different. However, it is slightly different, but we still go on with the same plan. Queen h4 check, and now we already mentioned why g3 is not possible many times, so no need to do it again. Go watch the other how to beat King's Gambit videos before you watch this one. King to f1, knight f6, knight to f3 attacking the queen, queen to h6, so you can relate it to previous videos. What about c4? This plan we haven't really discussed in such position. We can't really go to d5, and it looks like our opponent will be able to take control of the center. It doesn't look bad at all. We're going with the usual move, bishop d6. c5 can't be pushed, obviously, not yet. And after d4, white has got a strong center, at least it looks strong. And also is threatening to play c5, and we're going to be demolished if we don't play the right move now, which is b6. This is to give extra support. We don't necessarily want to develop the light square bishop in fianchetto. We just want to put extra support over the square c5. So, knight to c3, continuing development, castle. And now, remember all the patterns that we've studied in the past, because they're all related to each other. Let's look at two options now, either knight to b5 or knight to e5. The ideas will be explained in a second. So, knight to b5 idea is to obviously take this bishop, isolate our pawn in the d file, and also, I mean, obviously taking our bishop pair away. We don't care, and we play knight e4. And here, if our opponent does take our bishop now, we're going to take back with the pawn. But we'll get there in a second. Let's look at this move. Queen to c2, the idea of putting pressure on this knight. The best move here is rook to e8. Black doesn't give up this knight, because here you might be looking at this move. Knight g3, this is a fork. You're attacking the king and you should be winning the exchange. The pawn cannot really take you because you can take the rook. So, but the thing is that our knight is considered more important than this rook. This rook is useless. It's a weakness. And it would be kind of a relief for our opponent if we were to give this knight for this rook, and then white will be able to operate with the rest of the pieces, especially after taking the bishop pair from us. So now let's make an example. If bishop to d3, adding pressure on the knight. Okay, well, bishop to f5, and a move like g3 to put more pressure on this pawn, considering especially that the f4 pawn is pinned, doesn't work because of queen to h5. And we're threatening this knight, just like we're threatening this pawn. We're also threatening knight takes, and bishop takes here doesn't work because bishop takes back comes with that fork. We're completely winning, and it's not like our opponent can just play, I don't know, queen to g2 to save everything, because bishop h3 would pin the queen to the king, and not even a move like, I don't know, moving the knight away, for example here, knight to e5, getting out of the attack or something. Knight to g3 is just a winning move. So you're going to win material no matter what. And in this position, earlier we went through bishop to d3, adding pressure on the knight. What if white takes this bishop? Okay, fine, we take back with the pawn. We don't care, we have a lot of control over c5. That means one thing, that these pawns are not going anywhere anytime soon. Bishop to d3 now, putting pressure on that knight. Okay, bishop to f5. And now, let's make an example. Let's actually look at c5. The idea is that after all the swaps and development of the bishop, then the rook might come in an open file and maybe take it from there. How do we deal with this move? Also, especially considering that the queen is, you know, the white player is attacking it multiple times. You take it with the b pawn, and after take back, this is completely compromised. The game is completely over after the crucial move knight a6. So here's the thing: we're threatening knight going to b4, and after well, you know, the queen will have to move, but then you take the bishop, the queen will take back, and then you have a discover check, knight g3, and you win the free queen. So a3 is the only move here, but now you just take this pawn completely for free, and you're threatening the exact same thing. The game is completely over. So as you notice, c5 is a bad idea. What if simply development? But the most important thing here to remember is that the opponent king can't castle, has lost the right to castle forever. Queen to g6 comes now. And after knight to h4, it's a counterintuitive move, because knight to h4 now seems like it's actually really good for white. What are you going to do now? Well, simply knight d2 check, queen takes back, and now you take this bishop with check. It's completely for free, and you're winning the game. So you see why that's a really bad move. So before we go on to the main topic of this video, let's look once again at that move. Take, and now when they play the early bishop e2. Okay, check, king moves, knight f6, knight f3, queen h6, c4, and now bishop to d6, d4. Very important, you want to play c5, so you play b6, so that doesn't happen. Knight to c3, castle. And now, earlier we went through knight to b5. What happens after knight to e5? This looks like a very reasonable move, but you just play rook to e8. And now you got double attack over this knight. And by the way, let's pay attention to the fact that pawn to g3, now exploiting the f4 pinned pawn, cannot happen. He might argue, you see, this looks like a good move. Our opponent just threatening to take this for free. But here you just play queen a3, queen h3 check. And when the king moves away, you know, this pawn in h3 is pinned, so you can take and, you know, have fun. So if the king goes to g1, for example, the key move is rook takes knight. This cannot be recaptured. It's a completely free knight. If the rook gets captured, then bishop to c5 is a deadly move, as you can tell. If there's a vision zook, maybe the white player says, you know, I'll attack your queen to get the queen away from there, and then I'll recapture the rook. You play queen to h5. And now, if our opponent queen trades with us, then we're just going to recapture back with the rook, and we're up material. If instead white says, you know what, I'll recapture your rook now. Okay, check. There is no way to block except, well, there is no way to block. Except queen, bishop, but you just take them. So the king will have to move to g2, but now bishop h3 is made. And in this position, after the white player played knight e5 and we played rook to e8, we mentioned how g3 is obviously not working. What if white plays... Oh, by the way, you know, the idea of king f2 is just stupid to do a manual castle, because as soon as you move the rook, the queen will infiltrate in h2. So just remember, it's impossible for this king to ever be safe. What about queen d2 in that position? Double attack on the pawn in d4. I mean f4. This is met with knight to h5. Obviously, we want to keep defending this pawn. So our opponent can say, you know what? Let's trade. So that at least I will take that pawn back. The thing is, this, you know, you see, at this point though, the pawn cannot be taken because the knight is pinned. So you will just play f6. Right, so let's stop with this line, and you know enough now. So let's just go on to the main topic of this video, and then we will finally close this chapter and the saga. So in this position, taking d5 and taking f4. What about the early knight f3? This is the best move, and I've kept it for the end for this reason. We have also seen a lot of stuff in the past. Now we know we have to play knight f6, and in the past we went through bishop e2, c4, bishop b5. And we looked at them extensively. So in this video, we're going to go through what we haven't gone through, which is basically d4, bishop to c4, and knight to c3. Positions are often interchangeable in a way that, you know, if you recognize the patterns, then, you know, a certain position that you saw somewhere else will occur again. So once you know the ideas, then you know how to play with every single variation of the King's Gambit. So let's look at only things that we haven't seen. Let's start with bishop to c4 defending the pawn. This is bad. How do you deal with this? You deal with this by playing c6. And now you are going to take that pawn. And it's all fine if our opponent takes us, because then we develop. So let's make this example. Let's say pawn takes us, you know, knight takes back. Our opponent will get the castle. And we do give a check, bishop c5 check. And this cannot be blocked with d4 because we have double attack. I mean triple attack over that square. Our opponent has double attack. So we're doing just fine. We're doing better. The king will be vulnerable. Castle. Now our opponent will have to develop. So d3 comes with an attack on this pawn. The idea of the King's Gambit is that the bishop will recapture the pawn in f4 after all. Knight to g4. It's too late for white to do anything. What's our opponent going to do? Queen e1 with the idea of going this side, the usual idea, or maybe queen e2, but nothing works because the knight's going to f2 no matter what. Let's make an example. Queen to e1. Okay, fine. Rook to e8 attacks the queen, and the queen will have to move again. Queen h4, getting away from all that, doesn't work, simply because of knight to f2. And now the problem is very simple. There's an attack on the queen, although you might argue that the queen is defended. The problem is, how is our opponent going to take back? If they take the knight with the queen, then bishop takes queen. If they take with the rook, then you can take the queen for free. The knight can't take you back because then you got checkmate in e1. So in this position, what if the queen goes to d2 and puts double protection over the square f2? Okay, well, knight to e3 attacks the rook. When the rook moves, let's say rook e1, bishop to g4 comes now. The idea is to take the knight and smash everything around the king side and then play queen to h4. And this is unstoppable because the knight's got nowhere to go. I mean, except g1. But if that happens, position is evaluated -6 after queen h4. The idea is to play rook a to e8 and then knight to f5 with the idea of knight g3. At this point, if you get to play these moves, position evaluated -7. There's absolutely nothing that the white player can do because his development is not even possible. So let's not go through knight g1. But rather, what happens if white tries a normal development? Knight c3. Okay, take this one. Pawn takes back. Queen to h4. We're putting pressure on this rook. And here, even if you make white play the best engine moves, nothing's helping anyway. You'll see what our plan is. What if knight e4, attacking the bishop, right? Okay, the best move is to take this bishop. This comes with an attack on the queen, so our opponent will have to take this knight. Can't take the bishop yet. Okay, rook a to d8, attacking the queen. The queen will have to move. Queen will have to go to e2 because any other square should be taken. The rook will be taken. So queen e2, still defending the rook. Rook f to e8, pinning this knight. And this knight is never going to take this bishop. And nothing works here. Even if you, because we're planning to play f5 and then we're pinning the knight. So we're winning material. If queen to f1, still f5 comes. And when the knight moves, you're going to have rook takes rook, pinning the queen to the king. It's completely game over. So that's happening no matter what. So let's make a recap. And we'll quickly go through the other idea. But that's even worse. Pawn takes in d5 and pawn takes in f4. Knight f3. Knight f6. And now we're looking at bishop c4 defending the pawn. c6. What if our opponent doesn't take the pawn, but rather castles? Well, okay, pawn takes. That's what you're going to do. You're just going to take with the pawn. Comes with an attack on the bishop. Bishop b5 check. Knight c6. And after d4, putting an opponent in the center, preparing knight e5, putting pressure on the knight, and allowing to take the pawn in f4. Well, not yet, because you're going to play bishop d6. Okay, rook e1 check. Did we lose the right to castle? No, because of bishop e6. A move that he wouldn't usually do, but it's absolutely fine to do so. We're going to be castling, and this pawn in f4, we are not going to give it away. Knight to g5. This is why, personally, I was a bit surprised when I saw that the rook e1 check is allowed, because bishop e6 is not the type of move I would like to play, because knight to g5 puts double attack on that, and there's only one defender, and I don't see any other way to defend it, at least not a good way. I don't want to use the queen to defend that. So the black player here goes on with castling and gives up the pawn, because after take, this rook cannot really recapture this pawn. It's not like we've actually lost that pawn, and this is the type of move that you wouldn't see how that loses. But then you realize that you're watching endgame strategies videos and you care mostly about ideas and not memorizing moves. What's the type of move that you need to know how to play against King's Gambit players in such type of positions to destabilize the white king? f3. This is the key move, the thematic move. I didn't say the word thematic in a long time. This cannot be taken back with the queen, right? The pawn cannot be taken with the queen because knight d4 forks the world. This also cannot be taken back with the pawn, because bishop h2 check, and now the king is completely exposed. King takes, knight to e4, as if one sacrifice wasn't enough. This cannot be taken in any way, neither with the pawn nor with the rook. You see, if you take it with the pawn, queen h4 check, and after the king moves, let's say g2, you're going to f2 with the rook, and then you're checkmating straight away. If the king goes to f1, the best move is rook to f2, preparing queen g3 with a checkmate to follow. In this position, not even the rook can take the knight. You might argue that the rook will have access to the square h4, so you can't do the check. Well, you take the rook first of all, and now what is there to do for our opponent? Nothing. This king is completely exposed, and there's no way to use the queen to defend either. Or the bishop. Let's make an example. Bishop to f1. Queen check. Bishop blocks, and now rook to f3. Inevitably going to take this bishop. No defense is possible. Okay, in this position, instead of bishop f1, what if queen to f1? Okay, rook f3. Comes with an attack on the queen and also an attack on h3, supporting h3. Now the idea of playing queen h4, and that's going to be it. Oh, one last mention in this position. After the deadly move f3, you might say, okay, what if queen f3, but like, instead of allowing knight to d4, first let's take the knight, and then we'll play queen f3 and play maybe a normal game. Here, you don't even recapture the bishop. You just play knight g4. And now here you have all the ideas of the world. Pawn check. If the king moves, then you're going up and win the game. If the king moves to f1, then check again. And then the king, you know, will have to move, can't take the pawn because of the rook. And then you can push and promote. Whatever, you can do anything you want. So you might argue, okay, what if the pawn takes? Well, queen h4 ends the game. We're threatening this, we're threatening this. And the pawn can't take the knight because the bishop is also supporting us.